Welcome back to another edition of ALEC TV. I'm Tom McLaughlin, joining you from the States and Nation Policy Summit in Scottsdale, Arizona. And I'm joined now by our Chief Economist and Vice President of Policy, or President of Policy. What are you now?
Yeah, Executive Vice President of Policy.
Wow, so that's a pretty big shift.
Fun times.
Yeah, that's
exactly.
awesome. So I wanted to talk to you because as our Chief Economist, you have no doubt seen the jobs report today.
Great numbers. I mean, this American economy is extremely resilient. I mean, we're like 10 years in at this point to the economic recovery. A lot of people forget, but this is the longest running economic recovery in most people's lifetimes at this point. We surpassed the tech bubble in that recovery in the 90s, and we are really in uncharted territory for how strong this economy is this far into the recovery from the 2008 Great Recession. And the numbers coming out, I mean, well over 250,000 new jobs created this last month, which means the 3-month rolling average now is over 200,000 jobs created per each of those months. Really impressive. I mean, still hitting those 50-year lows in unemployment rate at 3.5. So this American economy still seems to have some juice to it, and that is great. And as you've heard me say many times, Tom, I'm convinced that if it wasn't for great policy coming, things like tax cuts and regulatory relief, this would probably not be nearly as strong as we're seeing, and perhaps we'd already be in some sort of economic correction.
Absolutely, and it's very auspicious that this economic surge continues as we head into 2020, which is a very important year, as we all know.
And it's a huge gift for states, because one of the biggest beneficiaries of strong national economy is actually state economies, right? And so budget surpluses, abilities for states to do things that perhaps they didn't have the resources to do in many years, like cut taxes,
right.
Or even put money away for a rainy day, because we know it may not be now, but at some point we're going to have an economic correction. Let's hope it's years from now,
yeah,
but
right.
When it happens, our state's prepared for it. So states putting away money for a rainy day, states using it to invest in things like infrastructure that were deferred because of the recession, and cutting taxes and becoming more competitive. I think the most important lesson, though, now is for states is to not build these really the record revenues into baseline spending, because when that happens, we've seen it happen time and time again. It's the California boom and bust problem. When times are good in California, their progressive income taxes are bringing in tons of money, their investment income taxes, and then when times go down, they have the real crash, and then it's quote unquote a need to raise taxes in many of these states, and it really sets up those of us who believe in fiscally responsible policies, sets us up for failure with this boom and bust problem. So we're really cautioning states, be careful. The good times are here, yes, now, but they're not going to last forever. So let's make sure we try to extend it as long as we can, but also prepare for the eventual rainy day.
Absolutely, and in the interest of preparing, you do a lot of work. You're also doubling as one of the chairs of the Tax and Fiscal Policy Task Force here at ALEC. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're still writing Rich States, Poor States, and overseeing a lot of our fiscal and economic work. Yeah, so
there you go. So, what are you guys doing in your task force in terms of policy preparation for 2020, or what you're kind of prioritizing, what you're really looking at there?
Well, and as we talked a little bit about this week too, we've got the ALEC-wide policy priorities as we're going into 2020,
right.
Things that we talked about with the board and with legislators throughout the week, and people really love the ideas of things like fiscal responsibility, innovation, individual empowerment. Those would be the big kind of ALEC-wide policy priorities for 2020, and then filtering into the task force and the central levels with our Center for State Fiscal Reform. Fiscal responsibility will be key in terms of tackling the massive unfunded pension obligations that we measure every year for states, the OPEB liabilities, bonded debt, all of those type of publications that we put together, and giving legislators some real free market tools at their disposal to making solutions that benefit their constituents. And then one of the things we've heard about a ton in tax area at ALEC over the last year is property taxes.
Right.
And it's something that everybody hates generally in the states. As a New Jersey native yourself, you know that very well, and especially with federal tax reform limiting, and I think we all know it was the right decision, I think, to limit the SALT deduction from being previously unlimited before tax reform federally, now being capped at $10,000 a year. What that does, though, is it brings more light on really high property tax bills. And so now we're working with lawmakers to address this issue of high property taxes, and ALEC recently adopted, as you know, the truth in taxation model from Utah that really does bring some transparency and accountability to the process of assessment-driven property tax hikes, which is the name of the game with a lot of locals and how they've overspent and now property tax bills have gone up. So lots of fun things in the fiscal responsibility the space, I should say, that our task force on tax and fiscal policy and Center for State Fiscal Reform will be very busy next year, as always.
Absolutely. And as somebody who wears all these hats at ALEC and interacts with the legislators and rulemakers and stakeholders that we have, what's your advice to everyone kind of going forward?
Well, I think A is good times don't last forever when it comes to the economy, so let's prepare for the eventuality that the economy is going to go softer and that we need some real policies in place. One of those is things like Colorado's Taxpayer Bill of Rights, stopping the massive run-up in state spending right now, addressing things like unfunded liabilities, and really getting down to the kitchen table budgeting and tax issues that Americans care about. And I think that's the best advice going into any election season for Republicans, for Democrats, for independents, for libertarians, anybody across the board is caring about those issues constituents care about, and it turns out so many of them are within our wheelhouse at ALEC dealing with the economic issues.
Absolutely. Jonathan, I want to thank you for joining us today. Really always appreciate your insight as always, and we'll be back with some more ALEC TV right after this.